Good morning, friends. It's Jessica from Three Rivers Homestead, and today I thought we would very quickly just go over some tips and tricks for making your food stretch, reducing your food waste, and preventing yourself from running out of some of the essentials and staples during a pantry challenge. So if you're planning to do the Three Rivers Challenge with me here in the next few months, why don't you stick around and I'll share with you some of the things that I've found helpful in the last few years of doing the challenge. If you're not sure of what the Three Rivers Challenge is and what I'm talking about, I'll link below the video in which I talk about the details of the challenge. So why don't we get started with some of these hacks that I hope will help you if you're following along and joining us this year. One of the things that I find are easiest to run out of in a pantry challenge are your cooking fats. And the very first year I ever did the challenge, I very quickly realized that I did not keep enough cooking fat in my home. When I talk about cooking fats, I mean any of your olive oil or other oils that you use, things like lard or tallow, or if you're a dairy family, even butter. And I guess you don't really realize how essential these items are to cooking and preparing food until you run out. If you don't have cooking fat, you end up having to boil everything. So since that first year when I ran out, I now always keep a large supply of cooking fats in the house just in case we ever had to do an unintentional pantry challenge. But another thing to do other than stocking up and preparing ahead of time is to just make sure you don't waste the fats that you do use in your kitchen. So anytime you look in my fridge, I always have an assortment of jars. Everything from saved bacon grease to this was hamburger grease that was drained. I believe this was extra olive oil that I had used to fry something up, and then I just drained it and saved it in a jar for future use. Some duck fat from butchering. I always keep these in my fridge, and I can use them for things like frying potatoes or cooking up some eggs, things like that. And then I don't have to waste my oils and my lard that I've rendered on those kinds of things. So it's just my first tip, I guess, would be to not let any of your fats go to waste. Just put them in a jar. They'll be good in the jar for about a month in your fridge. So if you don't plan on using it up in a month, I would stick it in your freezer and then it will last for a year or so. But this is really helpful. And even if you're making broth, sometimes when you make bone broth, you'll find that the top will have a nice thick fat cap on it. If you're low on cooking fats, you can even just take off that fat cap and put that in a separate jar and use that for cooking your foods, and then just use the broth in your soups or whatever you're planning to use it for. So don't let your cooking fats go to waste. You do not want to run out of those. While we're talking about cooking fats and not wasting the byproducts of the meals that you're cooking, whenever I make a roast or a roast chicken, roast beef, pork roast, anything like that, I save the drippings of that to use in future meals. And by drippings, I'm just talking about the broth that sort of collects at the bottom of the roasting pan, or if you make it in an Instant Pot, it's the water that's at the bottom of that. That is actually broth. It's the same as if you were making bone broth later on using the bones from that roast. But that's the really concentrated gelatin, broth, and fat, and it's a great addition to future meals. So generally, if I make a roast one night, I save those drippings, and then the next day, if I make a dish that would be using rice or even pasta, I'll just add those drippings to it, and it'll give it a wonderful flavor and a little extra fat and just a nutrient boost that would otherwise go to waste if I were just washing that pan out and letting that go down the drain or into the trash. So don't let those drippings go to waste. It's some of the best nutrition and flavor that you can use to enhance other meals. Speaking of broth, whenever you can a vegetable and you go to drain this out and use the veggies that are in the jar, the water that's left behind is technically veggie broth. In this jar of green beans, this water that they were canned in is veggie broth from green beans. And so when I go to use these green beans and I drain them out, I don't let the water inside of this jar go to waste. I will strain it out into another jar and put it in my fridge, and the next time I make a soup or boil rice or do anything like that, I will just use the water from this jar to make it, and that gives it the extra nutrition of a veggie broth. So definitely don't let that go to waste. It's the same for canned meat. The broth that you can your meat in, make sure that you strain that out and use that broth in future meals. Also, let me find a fruit. The same goes for fruit. These are some canned pears, and I typically just can my fruit in plain water. I raw pack it in water, but for some people they have canned their fruit in a syrup. That's precious. If you're getting low on sugars and other sweeteners during a pantry challenge, make sure when you strain out these pears that you save the water or the syrup that's left behind, and that can be used to sweeten or flavor future batches of oatmeal, and then you wouldn't have to use up sugar in the oatmeal. You can use the water to make things like Jell-O. A lot of times I'll just take, instead of getting into my jars of fruit juice that I've canned, I'll just use the juice from my canned fruit to make my Jell-O. It's water that would otherwise go to waste if we didn't find a purpose for it. So that's another way to save on some of your grocery items during a pantry challenge. Don't let that water in your canned goods go to waste. There's good nutrition in that and good flavor. I've done videos before on my favorite items to can, either pressure can or water bath can, and I mentioned in my water bath canning video that applesauce is one of my very favorite items to preserve. And there's a reason for that, because when you're doing a pantry challenge, applesauce can be such a wonderful substitution for many different foods. Eggs are something that we typically run out of during the winter months, because you may not know that eggs are a seasonal food, and chickens do stop laying in the winter when the days get shorter and it gets very cold out. In fact, our chickens haven't given us an egg in about a week and a half, so we're now digging into our stores and the eggs that we preserved over the growing season. So when we reach the end of January, if the chickens are not still laying, we will not have any eggs in the house. And if you're a family that does a lot of baking, that can be a huge problem. So I find applesauce to be a wonderful egg substitute. If you use 1/4 cup of applesauce in your baked goods, it will give the same effect as 1 egg. So a lot of times we don't even eat the applesauce as a treat. We just use it a lot for baking purposes during our winter months. Applesauce and other fruit sauces, and even things like canned pumpkin, can also be a great oil substitute. It kind of works 1 for 1. So if your recipe calls for 1 cup of oil and you're getting low on your oils, just use applesauce instead, and you can use 1 cup of applesauce in that baked good, and it'll give you the same effect. So this is a precious resource in our house. We typically can a lot of fruit sauces, not only because we love the taste of them, but because they can be very valuable when you're running low on supplies in the winter. Speaking of egg shortages during a pantry challenge, if you're also running low on your oils and you want to save your applesauce as an oil replacer and not use it all up as an egg replacer, chia seeds make a great egg replacer. What I do is I just take a cup, and if you take 1 tablespoon of chia seeds, put it in the cup, and then add about 2.5 to 3 tablespoons of water, stir it around and let it kind of sit for a minute and get that gelatinous chia seed texture, that will be a great egg replacer in your baking as well. And so we not only keep a bulk amount of chia seeds in the house for things like smoothies and to make chia seed yogurt and things like that in the morning for the children, but it is a great egg replacer. So having this on hand during a pantry challenge can be very helpful when you're running low on eggs. One of the most common questions I get when I talk about doing a pantry challenge over the winter months is, what do you do for fresh greens? And I do recognize that fresh greens are a huge source of nutrition, and during the growing months we eat salads almost daily here in our house. But that's not an option for us here in the winter months, and during the months of January and February when we're doing this challenge, we have to get a little creative and come up with other options. And so what I do is I always keep sprouting seeds in bulk here in the house for the winter. This is a mix that I get from Azure Standard. It has radish seeds, alfalfa, broccoli, and clover, I believe. And what you do is you just get a quart-sized canning jar, you put a few of the seeds in the bottom, fill it with water, and let it soak for a day, and that will start the process of germination for the seeds. And then it has a special lid on the top. This is a sprouting lid, so you can just turn it upside down, drain the water out after that first day, and then you leave it in a windowsill and you just rinse the seeds a couple times a day. And within about 3 to 4 days, you'll start to have sprouts. And those can be used as a lettuce substitute on your sandwiches. They can be, even in tacos, we've used them in place of lettuce before. And that's a great way to get that nutrition, to get the kind of crunch of a lettuce texture in the meals that you might be missing out on. And I just feel like this is a great nutrient boost for us in the winter when we don't have those fresh greens available. So we're definitely not missing out on fresh greens because we're able to sprout these seeds. Another option for very small amounts of lettuce, and this can also work for things like celery and green onions, is if in your very last grocery trip before the Pantry Challenge begins, you buy several heads of something like romaine. You can chop it off, use that romaine lettuce, and leave the very bottom of it and put it in a jar of water like this and set it in your windowsill. This is about 3 days, I believe, of regrowth. Lettuce, celery, and green onions will all continue to grow again. And it won't give you massive amounts of lettuce, but this will grow and get this tall. And if I'm just in the mood for a little bit of lettuce on top of a sandwich or on top of a taco, like we mentioned, I can cut a few pieces off and put it in there. And so that's just a nice way to keep this from going to waste. And, you know, for the first few weeks after the challenge begins, you can continue to get a little extra lettuce. So don't let those scraps go to waste and just keep them in your windowsill. Another tip for doing a pantry challenge might be obvious, but it's something that I tend to have a problem with. And it's just making sure that my portion sizes are appropriate during a pantry challenge. When I cook things like oatmeal and rice especially, I tend to overcook it and I end up with too much. And so I either need to find a way to reuse those leftovers and not let them go to waste, or I just need to get the portions under control when I go to cook them in the first place. And so let's talk a little bit about how to use leftovers in a way that, you know, your family will still enjoy eating it. The number one way that I found in a pantry challenge to do that is through soup. If you look at our ancestors, that's basically what they did. They always had a pot of soup over the fire and they just threw anything in there and it was just a big old pot. And so during a pantry challenge, I find that at least once a week I do what I call a fridge dump soup. And I just look through and any rice that might have been left over from a meal, any drippings that we talked about from a roast, any little bits of vegetables or whatever is left over in the fridge, I just dump it all into a pot. I add some broth, I might add some extra potatoes and vegetables that I have available, maybe some meat, and you just cook it up with some spices, bake some bread, and you're good to go for a meal. And all of that stuff that otherwise would have been wasted has found a new tasty option to feed your family. Now, bread, I talked about baking. That's another area that we can tend to allow things to go to waste. If you're a big bread baker and you find that you have leftover bread ends or just some scraps that kind of start to go stale, you know, those don't have to be wasted during a pantry challenge either, or anytime. What you can do with your bread ends is cut them up, sprinkle a little oil on them, add a little bit of seasoning, and turn them into croutons. And then when you make your soups, you have a nice little crouton to add to it and give it a little extra crunch and texture. So don't let those items go to waste. That's going to be the key. If you can use up more of your leftovers for a meal, then you're not having to dig into your pantry to open new jars of food and waste that when during a pantry challenge, you know, you're trying to conserve as much as possible. Another tip for making a pantry challenge go smoothly has to do with snacks. Obviously, when you are going to the grocery store weekly or monthly or whatever, you have the option to purchase a lot of the convenient snacks that you like, whether it's chips or crackers or cookies or fresh fruits, whatever it is you like to snack on in your house. And if you're not going to the grocery store, you're not going to have those available. And so you have to think ahead. For example, I have lots of dried garbanzo beans in my house, and I love hummus. But if I'm just looking for a quick snack, if I don't already have the hummus prepared, it's not going to be an option. I'm not going to take the hours to cook down the garbanzo beans and then prepare the hummus and then have the snack 2 hours later. I want something in the moment when I'm hungry for a snack. And so what I typically like to do is on Sunday evenings, I prepare some snacks ahead for the week to make it easier on myself. And like I mentioned, these are going to be snacks that are going to take a little time to prepare. So I make some hummus, bake some homemade crackers, cook up some Jell-O, things like that then are in the fridge. They're ready to go, and when the kids want a little snack, I can just pull it out and it's ready. If you're not shopping and having convenience food in the house, you have to make things as convenient as possible for you. And during a pantry challenge, you're going to typically be cooking meals from scratch 3 times a day. That's a lot of work. You don't want to also every day have to worry about cooking some snacks from scratch. So plan ahead, plan in advance, and you'll make it a lot easier on yourself. So throughout the rest of the challenge, I'll be sure to share tips and tricks that I find helpful. But I just want to remind you that the whole point of this challenge is to find ways to reduce waste, to save money, to find healthy ways to feed your family from your pantry staples, things like that. And really, I hope that my goal for you at the end of this challenge, if you join me, is that these things that you learn during the pantry challenge will just become a way of life in your household. And that is definitely what it's become for us here. So a lot of these tips and tricks I share, these aren't just things that I do during a pantry challenge. These are things I do all the time. And it saves my family money. It decreases the amount of waste that we produce. And I think that these are really healthy ways to eat. And that's all I have for today. It's now the middle of December. We're about 2 weeks from beginning the Three Rivers Challenge, and we'll be documenting it here on YouTube and also on Instagram. So I hope you'll join me in following the hashtag Three Rivers Challenge in both places. And I just want us all to be there to encourage one another and to find ways to make this whole process easier for you, not just during the challenge, but like I mentioned, throughout the entire year. So it's a wonderful community of like-minded people to support one another and learn from one another. And I hope that you will join us. With that, I'm going to sign off here. I hope you're having a blessed day, friends, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.